Welcome to Pharma Drama, the channel where we look at the science of healthcare and healthcare products. In this video, I want to talk about dry powder inhaler formulations, and in particular, how you might set about answering a question on DPI formulation in an exam. To do that, I've picked an exam question that I set last year, and I have some examples of the students' answers, from good to bad, for us to look at. Also, I'm going to have a go at answering my own question. So, if that sounds good to you, get yourself a drink. I actually don't have one, which is kind of unusual, but never mind, let's make a start anyway. Dry powder inhaler formulations are reasonably complicated, but they all comprise powders interacting through their surfaces, and so surface energy is super important. And the two most important forces are adhesion and cohesion. So what that means is, when I'm thinking about setting a question on dry powder inhaler formulation, I'm really getting you to think about what is surface energy and how does it impact product performance. So, if I think about last year's question, the question read, explain how the forces of adhesion and cohesion are utilised in the design of dry powder inhaler formulations. That particular question was worth 50% of the marks for my total question, and it was a 1-hour paper. So, if you do the maths, you've got 7.5 minutes in order to answer the question. That will become important in a bit when I have a go at answering it myself. How then should you go about structuring an answer to that question? I think the best thing to do is to talk about two types of formulation design, explain how adhesion and cohesion are important in those designs, and then discuss a little bit about what happens to the patient when they breathe in those powders. How do they get drugs into their lung? And what might happen if we were to change the physical properties, say, of the powder going into the dry powder inhaler. So, bearing that in mind, let's have a look at some of the students' answers, starting with this one. The student's written, two identical molecules stuck together are cohesion, and two different molecules stuck together are adhesion. Molecules of DPI formulations interact strongly with the air. If you need to create a new surface, you need to input energy. So there are two new surface areas. Now, there's a number of things wrong with that answer. The first one, and loads of students do this every year, is that they use the word molecule and particle interchangeably. But they do not mean the same thing. Molecules are individual things. Particles are collections of trillions and trillions of molecules. So particles are macroscopic, you can see them. And in the dry powder inhaler formulation, they should be around 5 micrometers in diameter or less. So right there, that's a problem with this answer. The student is mixing the word molecule with particle. You can't really have the concept of a surface area or a surface energy associated with a molecule. They really need to use the word particle. So that's one thing. And then it reads, molecules of DPI formulations interact strongly with the air. The question isn't really looking for you to talk about how the particles are interacting with air. It's really focused on how particles are interacting with each other in terms of adhesion and cohesion. So that doesn't help. And then the last bit says, if you need to create a new surface, you need to input energy. I agree with that, but is it answering the question? I'm not sure. So there are two new surface areas. Well, that's basically like saying, I create a surface, and in doing so, I've created a new area. But it's kind of obvious, isn't it? So that question, that answer rather, is not really addressing the question. So it didn't get a lot of marks. If we look at the next example answer, it reads, first of all, cohesion is the energy that separates the material into two new surfaces, and adhesion is the energy that can associate different material surfaces. In DPI, after a person breathes in, the fine particles that are inhaled into the lungs are separated by cohesion, and then adhesion adheres its active ingredient and carrier to one piece and is inhaled into the lungs. Does that make any sense to you? Did it? It didn't make any sense to me, and I'm marking, so that's the important thing. So that made no sense to me whatsoever. The first part of the answer is actually not too bad. It's defining cohesion and adhesion. So cohesion means two like things sticking together, and adhesion means two different things sticking together. So actually that's not too bad. Although I would say the question tells you that you're looking at adhesion and cohesion. What we need to understand is how they are used in the formulation of dry powder inhalers. And again, the answer isn't really doing that, is it? After a person breathes in, the fine particles that are inhaled in the lungs are separated by cohesion. Cohesion is a force of attachment, not separation, so that's a problem. And then adhesion adheres its active ingredient and carrier to one piece. To what piece? And is inhaled into lungs. It makes no sense whatsoever. So that student probably got a mark or two for defining adhesion and cohesion, but after that, not so good. Next answer is this one. Interaction forces, i.e. adhesion and cohesion forces, are important in DPI formulation performance. I don't have a problem with that, but that is actually the question, isn't it? The question actually says, explain how cohesion and adhesion are used in dry powder inhaler formulations. That's not helping. Solids interact via their surfaces, which surface energy, i.e. how much of the surface is in contact with the other, is high. That's not super clear either, is it? These forces are important as molecules with high surface energies, it's the same point, not molecules, particles, are highly cohesive or adhesive and thus clump to each other, increasing the particle size or sticking to the DPI device. I don't have a problem with that, that's actually true. Particle size is critical to delivery of drug into the lungs and should ideally be less than 5 micrometers in order to be delivered effectively. That is also true. Having read that answer though, are you clear in your mind what the two formulation strategies are for dry powder inhalers and how adhesion and cohesion play a role in that? No? Me neither. So again, the student isn't really answering the question, are they? They're writing some stuff down which they think is related to the question, but it's not really answering it. So again, not super helpful. Next answer. There are 2 formulations for dry powder inhalers on the market. That's good, because it's true. The first is agglomerated powder systems. Okay, that's true. And utilises the power of cohesion. Since there are no excipients in this formulation, only the API, usually in a high dose, is present. The second formulation available is the carrier-based formulation that utilised the force of adhesion, where the drug particles adhere to the carrier or excipient, usually lactose. I don't mind where that answer was going, because for one thing, it did define the 2 types of dry powder inhaler formulation, which is agglomerated powder and carrier-based. And it also said that cohesion is the important force in an agglomerated powder system, and adhesion is the important force in a carrier-based system. But that's about it. The question is looking for way more than that, how they work and what happens when the patient breathes in. So that answer is on the right lines. Nothing really that's in that answer is wrong. It just doesn't go far enough in explaining how the product is working. So of the marks available, I think that answer would have got around about 40%. Not 40% of the 50%, by the way. 40% of the marks I'm giving for that answer. So 40% is just around a bare pass, isn't it? Let's look at the next example. Dry powder inhaler is the main device for lung delivery, and DPI devices rely heavily on interaction forces. I'm not arguing with that, but it's not adding to the answer, is it? The question is telling you that. And so that's one of those sentences that someone writes down. It uses a bit of time and they feel like they've put some words down, but actually it's not contributing to answering the question. So you'd find a little line in the margin of that exam paper saying not relevant to the question. The 2 formulations. Firstly, agglomerated powder systems, good, depend on the amount of cohesion. Too much cohesion and the aggregates will not break up. Too little cohesion and the aggregates will not form. Now, what we're doing there is they're defining cohesion and agglomerated powder. So that's really good. And they're also starting to touch on how strong the force of cohesion is. If it's too strong, that can be a problem because these aggregates don't break apart. and if it's not strong enough, they don't form in the first place. But they don't go any further and say why or what outcome are we looking for? You know, what's the result of those things? So it's better than the previous answer, but it's still not getting all the way there. Then it reads, while carrier-based depends on the adhesion force, too high for the drug to separate and too low for the drug to adhere. So again, same principle really. The force of adhesion is important for a carrier-based system. Too high and the drug won't separate from the carrier, too low and it won't adhere to the carrier in the first place. These are all true, but it's not, again, explaining why this is important. So that is going to get 55 to 60% of the marks. What that means then is that I should have a go at answering the question, so you can see what I would write in around about 7.5 minutes, because that seems fair, doesn't it? If I can't answer my own exam question in the time available, how can I expect you to? So, same deal as ever. I have my stopwatch up here, handily set to 7.5 minutes. So let's start and we'll see how we get on. So I think the first place to start is to say something like, there are 2 types of DPI formulation. Agglomerated powder is based on the force of cohesion, and carrier based is based, based on the force of adhesion. If nothing else, that at least shows the marker, me in this case, that you know what the 2 basic formulation types are, you know, the names, and also you know that one's based on adhesion, one's based on cohesion, and you know which way around they are. So you get quite a lot of marks just for a simple sentence like that. Then what I think you should do is expand a little bit on why this is important. So if we start with agglomerated powder, you could put that, couldn't you? Agglomerated powder, the milled drug, less than 5 micrometers. So you're showing you understand something about what the powder needs to show, is allowed to form clumps by cohering together. This makes a freer flowing powder, which is easier to handle. Then we might want to say what the patient has to do when they use the device. So we can say, when the patient breathes in, their inspirational force, in other words, how much energy they're putting in as they breathe in, needs to overcome the force of cohesion so that fine particles can enter the lung. Okay, you could also, to get top marks, you could note that the fraction of particles that reach the lung is called the fine particle fraction, FPF, because that's really showing that you understand some of the key concepts involved in dry powder inhaler formulation. Okay, and then you could also say if the cohesion is too low, the clumps won't form. If it's too high, the FPF will be low. So we're trying to strike a balance between clumps too high and clumps too low. And if really top marks, you could also note in this formulation there are no excipients. That really is covering all aspects of that. The other one is carrier based. So I would say here drug is adhered to an inert carrier, usually lactose, by the force of adhesion. The inspirational force needs to pull the drug from the carrier. So again, you've said how the formulation is working. If adhesion is too low, the drug won't adhere to the carrier, and if it's too high, the FPF will be low. I had a minute left, 6.5 minutes. That's not too bad. See how much I've written? Now, as I've said before, it's really important when the exam is only an hour long. In this instance, there are 4 questions on this exam. You don't have a lot of time to write your answer, and therefore it is super important that what you write is really focused on answering the question. I know how it works. You read the question and you think to yourself, okay, that's about dry powder inhaler formulations. So you go to your lecture notes for dry powder inhalers and you cut and paste your lecture notes into your document that you're creating as your exam answer, and then you might start tweaking it. But it doesn't usually work because it's not focused on answering the question. It's really important just to take a moment to read the question, make sure you understand what the question is asking for, and then write something which answers the question. No one is going to set questions in an exam that you can't answer in the available time. But where you will go wrong is if you spend a lot of time cutting and pasting and you've only got a few minutes left to try and tweak that answer towards answering the question. It's much better to start from a blank sheet of paper and just write something down. And everything that I've written here is answering something to do with the question. There's no wasted text in my answer, and I still had a minute left over. So at the end of the exam, I'd still have 5-6 minutes. I could go back and read this text and make sure that I was happy with it. Okay? So if there's one thing I really want you to take home from these videos, it's don't cut and paste your revision notes. I know it's super tempting, but it really isn't the way forward in terms of answering the question. Right, I hope you found that useful. If you did, please hit the like button and consider subscribing. It really helps the channel. Even better, tell all of your friends about the channel and they can watch these videos too, because that also helps the channel a lot. Otherwise, good luck with your revising, good luck in the exam, and I'll see you again soon.